Snow falls over the Etten moors, and for one heartbeat, it falls upward around a blade that shouldn't exist in this world. 2 scimitars. Black, scarred hands. Eyes like pale amethyst catching moonlight that has never touched a face like this before. A ranger of the north lowers his bow and doesn't loose the arrow, because whatever just stepped out of the fog moves like nothing born of Middle-earth. Too fast, too silent, too certain. They will call him demon. They will call him devilkin. Some will raise steel before he speaks a single word. But this is Drizzt Do'Urden, exile of the Underdark, hunted by his own blood, a warrior who has spent his whole life being judged by the color of his skin before anyone bothers to look at his heart. And Middle-earth is about to learn, the deepest darkness doesn't always wear a ring. This is galaxy lore untold, and this is what happens when a drow ranger, who trusts no crown, walks straight into a war between elves, men, and a dark lord who has never once faced someone who refuses to kneel to anyone. This story was written by me, and if there's a crossover living rent-free in your head, drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and the next what if might be yours. Subscribe, smash that like, ring the bell, because Faerun just walked into Middle-earth, and nothing here is ready for him.
The straight road does not end. That is the first thing Drizzt understands. In the half-second before understanding stops mattering at all. He has walked strange roads before, the black stone corridors of Menzoberranzan that curved without reason, the shifting paths of the Underdark where a tunnel could double back on itself and deliver you to your own footprints an hour later. He has learned not to trust roads, but this one is different in a way his instincts, honed across 40 years of surface life, have no name for. It does not curve, it does not deceive, it simply continues, past the point where continuing should be possible, past the moon, past the shape of the world he knows, until the world he knows is no longer beneath his feet at all. He remembers the storm on the Sea of Fallen Stars. He remembers the small trading cog he and Catti-brie had taken passage on, blown 3 days off course by weather that had no business existing in that season. He remembers a light on the horizon that was not lightning, and a road, an actual road, pale and impossible, laid across the water like a bridge for something too large to see, and the ship's timbers screaming as the current dragged them toward it. He does not remember Catti-brie's hand slipping from his. He does not remember the moment the ship became mist, and the mist became silence, and the silence became this: cold stone under his boots, pine and snow in the air, and a sky above him that is wrong in ways he cannot immediately articulate. The stars are unfamiliar, not absent, unfamiliar, arranged into constellations his ranger's eye has never charted, and somewhere behind that wrongness sits a colder truth he is not yet ready to examine. She is not here. He does not let himself think her name again, not yet. Grief is a blade too, and blades are dangerous to hold before you know the ground you're standing on. He rises the way he's trained his whole life to rise. Slow, silent, weight-balanced, both scimitars already loose in their sheaths, though he does not yet draw them. His piwafwi settles around his shoulders, and even torn as it is, worn thin at the hem from 3 days of storm and salt, it still does what it has always done. It makes the dark a little darker around him, folds him one half-step closer to invisible. The forest around him is old. That much he can feel before he can prove it. A weight in the air, a stillness that speaks of centuries rather than seasons. Tall, dark pines climb a ridge above him, and beyond them, jagged and distant, mountains catch the last silver of a moon. That is, he is almost certain, not his moon. The cold has teeth here. It bites through leather and into the muscle beneath, a cold that belongs to a season further north and further wild than anything he left behind in the Sea of Fallen Stars. He touches the onyx figurine at his chest, and it is warm, warm in a way stone should not be. A small mercy that tells him some part of his old life has come with him whether the road intended it or not. Guenhwyvar, he whispers, and the shadows around him gather and thicken and pour themselves into the shape of the panther, black on black, eyes catching what little light there is and throwing it back pale violet. She pads once around him, a full circuit, nose low, testing air that is as foreign to her as it is to him, and then sits, ears forward, watching the tree line with the patient stillness of a creature that has hunted 1,000 worlds and finds none of them, in the end, particularly surprising. "You are not troubled," he tells her silently, half question and half envy. "Would that I could borrow some of that." He does not know where he is. He does not know how long the road stretches behind him, or whether it stretches back at all. He knows only that he is a stranger in a strange dark, which, he allows himself the smallest, driest smile, is not, in fact, a new experience. He has been a stranger his whole life. He was a stranger to his own city before he ever left it. He can be a stranger here too, if that is what this place demands, and find his footing the same way he always has. One step, one choice, one act of decency at a time, and let the world decide for itself what to make of him. He begins to walk. Guenhwyvar falls in beside him, silent as smoke. It is Tarandir who finds him first, or more honestly, it is Tarandir's patrol that finds the panther's tracks first, pressed deep and wrong into hoarfrost 1/2 mile from where 3 of his men had camped for the night. And it is Tarandir who kneels over those tracks with the particular stillness of a man recalculating everything he thought he knew about the woods he has walked for 20 years. "Wolf," offers young Halbarad, no relation to the captain of that name farther south, just a boy of 19 summers who has been a ranger for less than 2, though even as he says it, his voice carries no conviction. "No wolf makes a print like that," Tarandir says. He does not look up. Too wide at the pad, too deep for the weight it should carry, unless it's carrying more weight than any wolf ever has. He straightens, one hand resting on his sword hilt, not drawing, only touching, the way a man touches a door he isn't sure he wants to open. And no wolf walks beside a man's boots the whole way, matched stride for stride, easy as an old hunting dog. There is a third print in the frost. Smaller, human-shaped but not quite, the gait too even, too controlled, the weight distributed with an economy that speaks of training so thorough it has become instinct. "Something's come down from the high passes," Tarandir says, and there is no fear in his voice, only the flat calculation of a man whose entire life has been built around exactly this kind of morning. The Rangers of the North do not have the luxury of running from the unknown. They are what stands between the unknown and everyone who sleeps easy south of the Brunnen, and they have held that line since before their fathers' fathers were born. Bows strung, nobody looses without my word. We follow the tracks. They follow for the better part of an hour, through pine and over granite shelves slick with old ice, until the forest opens onto a shallow bowl of a valley and they see him, small and dark against the gray rock, moving with an unhurried, deliberate grace that reads, even at this distance, as dangerous. The panther pads beside him like a shadow given weight. Halbarad's breath catches audibly. "Captain, I see it." Tarandir's voice does not rise, though every instinct in his body is screaming the same alarm his young ranger cannot suppress. He has heard the old tales, passed mouth to mouth around fires from Rivendell to the Angle, stories the elves tell more than the men do, of a black race of elves twisted in the deep dark beneath the world, cruel and merciless, servants of a spider goddess whose name is not spoken lightly even in warning. He has never believed he would see one. He is not certain he believes it now, staring at a figure whose skin is truly, impossibly black, whose hair falls white as new snow past his shoulders, walking a northern valley as though he owns it. "Bows," Tarandir says quietly. "Not on him. Not yet. On the beast." They spread through the tree line with the silent economy of men who have done this 1,000 times, and for a moment, one clean, suspended moment, it seems the ambush will go entirely to plan. Then the panther's head turns, unhurried, directly toward Halbarad's position in the brush, and Drizzt speaks without breaking stride, without so much as glancing toward the trees. "4 of you, I think. Perhaps 5. His voice is low. faintly accented in a way none of them can place, carrying easily across the frozen air. You've done well hiding your scent from the wind, less well hiding it from her. He inclines his head fractionally toward the panther. I would ask that no one loose an arrow, not because I fear it, though I do not discount your aim, but because I would rather this morning end in words than blood, and I suspect, if you are the kind of men I hope you are, you would prefer the same. Silence answers him. Then Tarandir steps from the tree line, sword still sheathed, bow lowered but not away, and behind him 3 more rangers do the same, arrows nocked but pointed to the ground. You speak the common tongue, Tarandir says. It is not quite a question. I speak several tongues. This one, it seems, travels well. Drizzt stops his advance, spreading his hands slightly. Not surrender, but an offering of stillness, of intent read plainly. I do not know this land. I do not know how I came to be in it. If you can tell me where I stand, I would consider it a kindness, and I would return it if the chance arose. You stand at the edge of Eriador, Tarandir says slowly, in lands watched by the Dunedain, the rangers of the north, and I will tell you plainly, stranger, that your kind is spoken of in tales that do not end well for the ones who hear them. His hand has not left his sword. Dark elves, servants of shadow, out of the deep places under the mountains. Something flickers across Drizzt's expression. Not surprise exactly. Recognition, perhaps, of a shape his whole life has worn before. He has heard some version of this speech 1,000 times, in 1,000 tongues, from men who decided what he was before he'd said a single word to prove or disprove it. Then let me be the first exception your tales have ever needed, he says, and there is no anger in it, only a tiredness so old it has become almost gentle. I am Drizzt Do'Urden, once of a city called Menzoberranzan, which I left behind for reasons your tales would likely approve of, if your tales have any room in them for a drow who chose different than his kin. I do not serve a spider goddess. I do not serve shadow. I serve a goddess of the wild places, if I serve anyone at all, and mostly these days I serve the simple idea that a person's choices matter more than the color the world was born with. Halbarad, still half hidden in the brush, lowers his bow another inch. Tarandir does not move, but something in the set of his shoulders shifts. Not trust, not yet, but the particular attentiveness of a man deciding a story deserves more listening before he decides how it ends. Fine words, Tarandir says. I've known men who could speak fine words with a knife already in your back. Prove them, if you can. Walk with us to the angle, unarmed, if you'd have me trust you at all, and let wiser heads than mine decide what to make of you. Refuse, and we part ways here, and I'll pray to whatever's listening that you go the direction opposite of everywhere I care about. Drizzt considers this. He considers the 4 bows, the tension humming through every man in the clearing, the panther beside him who could, with a single word, turn this valley into a slaughter in less time than it would take these men to draw their next breath. He considers, too, the particular ache of being offered exactly the choice his whole life has offered him again and again: submit to suspicion in the hope of proving it wrong, or answer suspicion with the violence it half expects, and confirm every fear it started with. He has made this choice before. He has never once regretted making it the harder way. I will not surrender Icingdeath and Twinkle, he says, nodding once toward his scimitars. A ranger does not walk unarmed into unknown lands, and I think you understand that better than most men would. But I will walk beside you, and I will answer what questions your wiser heads have, and I will ask Guenhwyvar, he touches the panther's flank, to return to her own plane of rest, so that your men need fear nothing more than the 2 blades any one of you carries yourselves. Tarandir studies him a long moment, studies the black skin, the white hair, the strange lavender eyes that hold none of the cruelty every old tale promised him, and finds, to his own quiet surprise, that he believes him. Not entirely, not yet, but enough. Fair enough, dark elf, he says. Walk with us then, and Valar help us both if I'm wrong about you. Beside him, Drizzt allows himself, for the first time since the road that would not end delivered him into this strange, cold country, something close to a smile. "Elf," he says quietly, almost to himself, testing the word like an old friend returned in unfamiliar clothes. "It has been a long while since anyone called me that without meaning it as a wound." The panther fades into mist and shadow at a whispered word, and the small company turns south, toward whatever judgment waits for him in the halls of men and elves, who have never once, in all their long histories, had to decide what to make of someone like him. The journey south takes the better part of 3 days, and in that time Drizzt learns more about the shape of this world than he had thought possible to learn from 4 wary men and their silences. He learns their names, eventually, Tarandir first, then Halbarad, then the 2 older rangers, Do'Urden, and a grim, quiet man called Ivarwin's son, who offers no other name, and seems content with that omission. He learns they are Dunedain, remnants of a kingdom broken long before any of their grandfathers drew breath, keeping watch over lands that no longer know they are watched, guarding borders that exist now only in maps drawn by men who remember what was lost. There is a nobility in it that strikes something old and familiar in Drizzt's chest. Men who serve without recognition, who bleed for people who will never know their names, because the alternative is a darkness they have decided, generation after generation, they will not allow. He does not tell them, not yet, how closely that mirrors his own long years in the wild south of Mithril Hall, keeping watch over travelers who never knew a drow ranger walk the ridgelines above their road. The land itself unsettles him in ways he had not expected. He has walked surface worlds before, the green hills of the Sword Coast, the deep pine of the Moonwood, mountains that climbed higher than any drow of Menzoberranzan had ever dreamed a mountain could climb. But this land carries an age he has never felt, not even in the oldest ruins of the Underdark. The stones here remember things. He can feel it in the old barrow mounds they skirt at a respectful distance on the second day, in the way Tarandir's men go quiet and watchful, passing a certain stand of stones that Drizzt is given to understand, in careful, clipped words, used to be a watchtower before an age none of them were alive to see. "You flinch less than I expected," Tarandir says on the evening of the second day, when they've made a cold camp in a fold of the hills, and the others have gone to sleep in shifts. He and Drizzt sit the first watch together, an arrangement Drizzt suspects is less about efficiency and more about a captain wanting a closer look at the stranger in his custody. Flinch at what? The land. Tarandir gestures at the dark hills around them, the barrow shapes just visible against the horizon. Most men who walk this road for the first time feel it, the weight of it. Things happened here that the ground hasn't forgotten. He studies Drizzt across the low, hooded fire. You walk through it like you felt worse. Drizzt considers the question honestly, the way he considers most things offered to him honestly. "I grew up in a city built from the bones of the earth itself, Captain, in tunnels older than anything your people have built on the surface of this world. I have walked past things far older and far less kind than your barrows. I do not say that to boast. I say it because I think you are asking, in your careful way, what manner of thing I truly am, and I would rather answer plainly than let you keep guessing at shadows." Tarandir is quiet a moment. "And what manner of thing are you?" "A ranger," Drizzt says, and there's a dry humor in it that surprises even him. As it turns out, apparently in more than one world, I hunt what threatens the innocent. I walk the wild places others fear to walk. I have spent most of my adult life proving, one act at a time, that the color of my skin is not the sum of my character, and I confess I find some grim comfort in learning that particular fight is not unique to the world I came from. He meets Tarandir's eyes across the fire, steady, unflinching. "Your tales say dark elves serve shadow. I will not pretend the tales are baseless. Where I come from, most of my kind do exactly that, and worse. But I am not most of my kind. I never was. That is, in the end, The only thing about myself I have ever been able to prove, and I have had to prove it more times than I can count. Something shifts in Tarandir's face. Not full trust, but the particular respect one hard man offers another when he recognizes a struggle he understands in his bones. My people have spent generations proving ourselves to a world that's forgotten why it should trust us at all, he says quietly. Blood of kings running thin in men nobody remembers were ever kings. Maybe that's not so different from what you're describing. Maybe it isn't, Drizzt agrees, and for the first time since the road delivered him into this strange country, he feels something loosen in his chest that has been tight since the moment Catti-brie's hand slipped from his. Not comfort exactly, but the ghost of it. The shape of a place he might, in time, come to call something other than foreign. They reach the angle on the fourth morning, a modest settlement, more scattered farmsteads and watchposts than a true town. Tucked into the fork of two rivers, Tarandir names the Horwell and the Loudwater. It is here, Drizzt learns, that word of his arrival has already outpaced his footsteps. A rider was sent ahead on the second day, and by the time the small company crests the final ridge, there is a welcome waiting that is not, strictly speaking, a welcome at all. A dozen armed men stand in a loose line before the central hall, and beside them, unmistakable even before introduction, carrying an authority that has nothing to do with rank and everything to do with bearing, stands a woman Drizzt will come to know as Iverwyn, eldest of the Dunedain remaining at the angle, keeper of lore that predates every living memory in the encampment. She studies him for a long moment before she speaks, and there is nothing of fear in her gaze, only a sharp, ancient calculation that reminds Drizzt uncomfortably of certain matron mothers he spent his boyhood learning to fear. "You have walked far, dark elf," she says, "farther than any road in this world should carry a living thing." Her eyes flick, briefly, to the empty air beside him, where Guenhwyvar's absence is almost a presence of its own. "Tarandir tells me you carry a beast of shadow at your call, and yet ask to send it away before entering lands not your own. That is not the courtesy of a servant of darkness." "It is the courtesy," Drizzt says carefully, "of someone who has spent a great deal of his life being feared before he was known, and has learned that fear answered with more fear only ever grows." Pretty words. Iverwyn's tone carries no unkindness, only the flat weighing of a woman who has heard pretty words used as a blade before. But words are cheap, and the world grows darker by the season. "Do you know what stirs in the east, stranger? Do you know what gathers its strength in a tower of black stone, and what shadow lengthens with each passing year, across lands your feet have never touched?" Drizzt shakes his head slowly. "I know nothing of this world save what I have learned in 4 days walking. I would learn more if you would teach it, and I would judge for myself what part, if any, I might play in it. That," Ivorwyn says, "is either the wisest thing you could have said, or the most dangerous. I have not yet decided which." She turns, robes catching the cold morning wind. "Come, there is one who should hear of this before any decision is made about what you are, and what you are permitted to be in these lands." A rider leaves within the hour for Rivendell. "I would have you go with him." The road to Rivendell is longer than the road to the angle, and Drizzt spends much of it in a silence that is not unfriendly, turning over the shape of what he's learned. A dark lord in a tower of black stone, a shadow lengthening, rings of power spoken of only in careful lowered voices, and one ring above all others that the rangers will not discuss even among themselves, as though naming it might summon its notice. It is a familiar shape, in its bones, a great evil gathering strength while smaller scattered peoples try to hold a line against it, unsure if anyone will come when they call for help. He thinks, unbidden, of Mithril Hall, of Bruenor, of 100 smaller fights against darkness that never made it into any bard's song, fought by people who never expected thanks and rarely received it. He thinks of Catti-brie again, and this time he lets himself. The ache of her absence has not dulled with distance. If anything, it has sharpened, honed by every mile that puts more unknown world between them. He does not know if the road that brought him here runs both directions. He does not know if she fell through it beside him and was simply carried somewhere else, some other corner of this strange country, or whether she is lost entirely to a world she never chose to leave. He allows himself, in the quiet hours of riding, exactly as much grief as he can afford without it unmaking him, and then he folds it away, the way he has folded away every grief his life has handed him, into a place where it can be carried without being allowed to control the carrying. I will find you, he thinks, with no evidence to support the promise, and no intention of breaking it regardless. Whatever this world asks of me first, I will find you after. Rivendell announces itself before he sees it, a change in the air, a hush that falls over the forest like held breath, waterfalls audible long before the valley opens beneath him, in a fold of silver and gold and impossible green. Even Drizzt, who has seen the deep beauty of the Underdark's phosphorescent caverns and the sweeping grandeur of surface mountains at dawn, finds himself slowing his pace, momentarily arrested by a beauty that feels less built than grown, as though the valley had simply decided, some age ago, to be this lovely and never stopped. He is met at the last bridge not by guards but by a single figure, tall, dark-haired, ageless in a way that unsettles Drizzt more than any threat could, robed in soft gray and silver, eyes that hold centuries behind them. I am told, the figure says in a voice like water over old stone, that a stranger walks our roads wearing a shape my people have only ever known as an enemy. I confess, I did not expect the tales the rangers carried to prove entirely true, nor entirely false. The stranger's gaze moves over Drizzt with a scrutiny that feels less like suspicion and more like genuine, ancient curiosity. I am Glorfindel. Elrond Half-Elven awaits you in the last homely house, and I would advise you, Dark Elf, to choose your first words to him with great care. He has weighed the fates of kingdoms with less thought than he is about to give to you. Drizzt inclines his head and finds, beneath the wariness, beneath the grief he carries folded small against his ribs, beneath the strangeness of a world with stars he does not know, something that feels almost like readiness. Then I will choose them honestly, he says, and let the weighing fall where it will. It is, I have found, the only kind of words worth offering. Glorfindel's expression shifts, not quite a smile, but something adjacent to one. That, he says, may be the first entirely correct thing you have said since you arrived in this valley. He turns, gesturing Drizzt forward across the bridge, toward the House of Light waiting beyond. Come, let us see what Elrond makes of you. The last homely house does not feel like a fortress, though Drizzt understands within moments of crossing its threshold that it is one in every way that matters, a place whose beauty is itself a kind of armor, a peace so deliberate and so deeply rooted that it is held against ages of darkness simply by refusing, absolutely, to be anything other than what it is. Elrond receives him in a high-ceilinged hall open to the evening air, firelight and lamplight mingling with the last gray wash of dusk over the valley. He is seated when Drizzt enters, and does not rise, not from discourtesy, Drizzt understands immediately, but from the unhurried authority of someone who has never once needed to stand to command a room's full attention. His eyes, when they meet Drizzt's, hold the particular depth Glorfindel's did, not merely old but layered, as though centuries had been folded one over another behind them without ever quite settling into stillness. Sit, if you would, Elrond says, and his voice carries the same water-over-stone quality as Glorfindel's, though deeper, quieter, edged with something Drizzt cannot immediately name. I find conversations of consequence go better when neither party is made to stand in judgment before the other. Drizzt sits. Guenhwyvar's figurine is warm at his chest, though he has not summoned her since the angle, a courtesy he suspects, and Elrond's slight nod confirms, has not gone unnoticed. You carry yourself, Elrond says, like a soldier who has fought a war he did not choose, and would not choose again, and yet would fight regardless, should the need arise. He studies Drizzt with an intensity that feels less like interrogation and more like the careful reading of an old text in an unfamiliar script. I have lived long enough to have met your kind before, Dark Elf. Not you, but your kin, or something enough like your kin that the old warnings my people carry were not written from ignorance. I do not discount those warnings lightly, nor should you, Drizzt says. I would think less of your wisdom if you did. My own kind gave the world every reason for those warnings, and gives it still, in the city I left behind. I do not ask you to forget that. I ask only that you let me answer for myself, rather than for them. That, Elrond says, is precisely what I intend to do. Tell me your tale, all of it, from the beginning, and leave out nothing you think might make you look less than you are. I have found the details men are tempted to omit are usually the ones that matter most. So Drizzt tells him. He tells him of Menzoberranzan, city beneath the world, where the goddess Lolth demands cruelty as devotion, and rewards betrayal above loyalty, where he was born third son to a house whose first act toward him, per the customs of his people, should have been his death, spared only because his mother saw some use in a third son a priestess might someday claim as sacrifice. He tells him of a childhood spent watching kindness punished and cruelty rewarded, of a father, Zaknafein, who taught him with sword and silence that a person could hold a blade with murderous skill and still refuse, in his heart, to become the thing his city demanded of him. He tells him of the day that lesson cost his father his life, offered up as sacrifice in his place, and of the years that followed in which Drizzt tried and failed, and tried again to find some way to be a drow without being that, without becoming what Lolth's faithful believed a drow must be. He tells Elrond of the surface, of exile, self-chosen before it could be forced upon him, of years spent alone in wild places with no company, but a magical panther and his own stubborn refusal to become bitter. He tells him of Bruenor Battlehammer, dwarf king who looked past a drow's black skin and saw, eventually, a friend worth dying for, of Wulfgar, of Regis, of Catti-brie, and here, for the first time in the telling, his voice catches, just slightly, on a name he has not spoken aloud since the storm took her from him. Elrond does not interrupt. He listens the way water listens to stone, patiently, completely, letting every word settle before responding to any of them. You lost someone, Elrond says, when Drizzt's voice trails into silence. In the crossing that brought you here, I do not know if I lost her, Drizzt says. I know only that she is not here, and I do not know if that means she is elsewhere in this world, or nowhere in it at all, or safe and whole in the world I left behind. I have chosen to believe the first, because the other two are not choices I can afford to make and still be of use to anyone, including myself. Something in Elrond's expression softens, not pity, which Drizzt suspects he would recognize and resent, but a recognition of a particular grief the ancient elf has clearly worn many times himself. I have loved and lost across ages longer than your people's history, Dark Elf. I will not insult you by pretending the wound closes quickly. But I will say this. Hope carried honestly, even without evidence, is not foolishness. It is often the only thing that carries us through the ages that require carrying. He rises then, finally, and moves to the tall window that opens onto the darkening valley. I believe you, he says, without turning. Not blindly. I have not survived this long by believing blindly in anything. But I have listened to a great many liars in my years, Dark Elf, and their tales do not carry this shape. Liars do not confess to failure. Liars do not stumble over the names of the ones they've lost. He turns back to face Drizzt directly. You are, as far as I can determine, precisely what you claim to be, which is rarer and more valuable than you likely understand in the days that are coming. What days are those? Drizzt asks. Elrond is quiet a long moment, weighing. Drizzt understands exactly how much truth this stranger has earned. There is a shadow gathering in the east, he says finally, greater than any this age has yet seen rise. A ring was made, long ago, by a power that should never have been allowed to make it, and that ring is not destroyed, though the world has spent an age hoping it was lost beyond finding. If it is found, if it returns to the hand that forged it, there will be no war fought in the years after, only conquest, and the long dark that follows conquest, that meets no equal resistance. Drizzt feels something settle in his chest. Not fear exactly, though fear is present in it. Something closer to recognition. He has felt this shape before. A threat large enough that no single sword, however skilled, could hope to answer it alone. And a slow, dawning understanding that the answer would require more than skill. It would require choice, made and remade, day after day, by people willing to stand when standing cost them everything. You are telling me this, Drizzt says slowly, because you believe I might choose to stand against it. I am telling you this, Elrond corrects, because I believe you deserve to choose with full knowledge of what the choosing costs. I will not command you, Dark Elf. I have learned across a very long life that the strongest allies are the ones who choose the fight themselves, rather than the ones ordered into it. His eyes hold Drizzt's, steady, ancient, and entirely without artifice. But I will say this plainly, a warrior who has spent his whole life refusing to become what the world expected of him, who chose good in a place built to punish it, such a person is worth more to this fight than an army of lesser conviction. Whatever you decide, I would have you decide it as yourself, and not as anyone's weapon. For a long moment, Drizzt says nothing. He thinks of Menzoberranzan, and Icewind Dale, and Mithril Hall, and every fight he has ever chosen, not because someone commanded it, but because the alternative was a version of himself he refused to become. He thinks of Catti-brie, somewhere in this world or beyond it, and of the strange, terrible comfort in learning that even here, even in a world with unfamiliar stars and older grief than his own, there is a fight worth choosing, and people worth choosing it beside. Then let me choose it honestly, he says. Tell me everything, the ring, the shadow, the players in this war before it fully begins. I will not promise you my sword yet. I have learned the cost of promises made before understanding. But I will promise you my full attention, and I suspect, once I have given it, my sword will follow regardless. Elrond's expression, for the first time since Drizzt entered the hall, breaks into something unmistakably like a smile, small, weary, and genuinely warm. That, he says, is the only kind of promise worth trusting. Come, there is a great deal to tell you, and I suspect, Dark Elf, that you are about to become considerably more important to the fate of this age than either of us yet fully understands. Outside, the last light fades from the valley of Rivendell, and somewhere far to the east, in a tower of black stone, something ancient and patient continues its long search, unaware, yet, that a new player has entered a game it believed it alone understood the shape of. The weeks that follow settle into something Drizzt has not felt in longer than he cares to admit. Purpose, freely chosen, shared among people who have decided, for their own separate reasons, that his presence among them is worth the risk of it. Elrond does not send him into the war blind. Over the following days, in long conversations held in the Hall of Fire and quiet walks along the valley's silver paths, Drizzt learns the shape of the age he has fallen into. The history of the One Ring, forged in secret by the Dark Lord Sauron to bind and corrupt the lesser rings given to elves, dwarves, and men. The long defeat at the end of the Second Age, when the ring was cut from Sauron's hand but not destroyed. The centuries of uneasy peace that followed, built on the fragile hope that a thing of such evil, lost, might stay lost forever. That hope, Elrond tells him gravely, is dying. Word has reached Rivendell of a creature called Gollum, once a halfling kin, twisted across centuries by long possession of the ring, now escaped from a captivity that should have kept his knowledge contained. Worse, far worse, is the growing certainty that Sauron's own servants, the terrible ringwraiths called the Nazgûl, have begun to stir, riding forth from Mordor in search of a small, forgotten corner of the world called the Shire, where rumor places the ring in the keeping of a halfling, with no notion of what he carries. If the Nazgûl find the ring before we do, Elrond says, on the evening he finally lays the whole shape of the danger before Drizzt, there will be no war to fight. There will only be Sauron's triumph, arriving faster and more completely than any army could bring it. Every hope this age carries rests, at this moment, on a halfling we have not yet found, guarded by rangers stretched too thin across too much wilderness. It is the mention of rangers stretched too thin that decides Drizzt before Elrond has finished the sentence. Then let me be one more blade stretched across that wilderness, he says. I have hunted things far stealthier than wraiths, through darkness far more absolute than any your world can offer. If there is a halfling who needs finding and guarding, let me ride toward that need rather than sit safely behind these walls debating whether I am trustworthy enough to be of use. Elrond studies him a long moment, the particular weighing look Drizzt has come to recognize as the elf lord's version of a held breath, and then nods, once, with the air of a decision long since made and only now spoken aloud. There is a ranger already riding for the Shire, he says. A man called Aragorn, whom I have raised as my own and trust more than any living soul in Middle-earth to see this task through with honor. I will send you after him, with my blessing, and let the two of you decide between yourselves how best to share the burden of a road neither of you asked to walk. Drizzt rides east and north for 4 days before he finds any sign of the ranger he seeks, and it is Guenhwyvar, summoned back to his side the moment he leaves Rivendell's protective valley, who finds the trail first, nose low, reading a story of careful, deliberate footprints laid by someone who has spent a lifetime being difficult to follow. He catches up to Aragorn on the 5th night at a hidden camp tucked into a fold of hills above the East Road, and the meeting very nearly ends in violence before it begins. A blade half drawn, a challenge issued low and hard in a language Drizzt does not know, before Drizzt raises both empty hands and speaks Elrond's name like a password, which it very nearly is. Aragorn is younger than Drizzt expected and older than he looks. A weathered, watchful man with the bearing of someone who has spent his whole life being more than his circumstances suggested he was allowed to be. Which is, Drizzt thinks with some private amusement, a feeling he understands rather intimately. Elrond sends a dark elf to aid me, Aragorn says, once swords are sheathed and the fire's low light lets them study each other properly, and does not think to send word ahead of your coming. That is either great trust in you, or a very particular sense of humor on his part. Perhaps both, Drizzt allows. He tells me a halfling carries something the world cannot afford to lose, and that wraiths ride to find him first. I am here to make certain they do not. Aragorn's expression sharpens with interest, that is not quite trust but is, at minimum, professional respect. You've fought such things before? Wraiths, undead, servants of ancient evil? I have fought things in the Underdark that would make your wraiths seem almost polite by comparison, Drizzt says. I do not say that to boast. I say it so you understand. Whatever fear you may carry of them, I do not share it, and that may prove useful when fear is precisely the weapon they intend to use against us. It proves, in fact, to be more than useful 3 nights later, when the two of them, Guenhwyvar ranging silent and unseen through the trees alongside, finally catch sight of the halfling party they've been racing to find. 4 small figures on the East Road, exhausted, hunted, entirely unaware that the black-cloaked riders trailing them by less than a mile carry a dread that has broken the courage of grown warriors twice their size. The attack comes at Weathertop, in the ruins of an old watchtower under a moon thin as a blade's edge, and it comes fast. 5 Nazgûl converging on the small camp, with a terror that precedes them like a physical wall. A cold that has nothing to do with the season, and everything to do with the particular despair such creatures are built to inspire. Drizzt feels it wash over him. The will-breaking dread the wraiths carry like a weapon. The same dread that has, Aragorn told him grimly on the ride here, broken stronger men than the halflings they're protecting. It slides off him like water off oiled leather. He has spent his life resisting despair that Menzoberranzan itself was built to instill. The crushing, deliberate cruelty of a society designed from its foundations to teach its children that hope was a weakness to be punished out of them. He learned to hold his own light against that darkness before he ever learned to hold a blade properly, and the Nazgûl's dread, ancient and terrible as it is, finds no purchase in a heart that has already survived worse. "Behind me," he shouts to the halflings, both scimitars already drawn, Twinkle's blue glow, and Icingdeath's pale frost, throwing strange light across the ruined stones. Whatever fear you feel, it is a weapon, and weapons can be refused. The Nazgûl that comes for him first finds, to whatever passes for its shock, an opponent who does not flinch, does not freeze, does not offer the paralyzed terror it has harvested from every other mortal foe it has faced in 100 years of terrible service. Drizzt moves the way he has always moved, inhumanly fast, both blades weaving a pattern too swift and too controlled for the eye to fully track, driving the black-robed horror back a step. Then, too, its blade meeting his in a shriek of steel on something that is not quite steel at all. Aragorn fights beside him with a firebrand torn from their camp's dying flames, driving back a second wraith with the desperate courage of a man who has trained his whole life to face exactly this moment and never quite believed he'd survive it. Guenhwyvar erupts from the shadows to take a third wraith broadside, 200 pounds of astral muscle driving the creature backward off the tower's broken edge, with a shriek that curdles the night air. It is not victory. Drizzt understands that even as he fights, the Nazgûl cannot be killed by blade alone, not truly, and even his inhuman speed and skill can only hold them, delay them, force them to retreat, rather than destroy them outright. But holding is enough. Delay is enough. The wraiths withdraw into the dark, screaming promises of return that echo long after their shapes have faded from sight. And in the ringing, exhausted silence that follows, Drizzt turns to find one of the halflings, the one they call Frodo, pale and shaking, a wound at his shoulder already turning the sickly gray-white of something far worse than ordinary injury, staring at him with an expression caught somewhere between terror and dawning, disbelieving gratitude. "You're not," Frodo starts, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not what your fears expected," Drizzt finishes gently, kneeling to examine the wound with the practiced eye of a ranger who has treated 100 injuries in 100 wild places. "No, I rarely am. Now hold still. This wound needs tending faster than words do, and we have a hard ride ahead of us before dawn." Aragorn watches the exchange with an expression Drizzt cannot fully read, something between relief and a kind of careful, reassessing respect. And when their eyes meet over the halfling's bowed head, the Ranger of the North gives a single, small nod that carries more trust than a page of spoken oaths could have offered. "Elrond was right to send you," Aragorn says quietly. "I confess I doubted it when first I saw you. I do not doubt it now." "Save your doubt," Drizzt says, tearing a strip of cloth to bind Frodo's wound, "for whatever waits for us next. I suspect, from what little I've learned of this road so far, that tonight was only the opening move." Above them, the thin moon slides behind cloud, and somewhere far to the east, in a black tower that has felt, for the first time in centuries, something it does not fully understand, a resistance in the dark it did not account for, a will it could not break. A presence ancient and patient turns its attention, for the first time, toward a name it has never before had cause to learn. Drizzt Do'Urden. It will not be the last time that name crosses the Dark Lord's notice before this war is done. They reach Rivendell 4 days later, Frodo's wound worsening with every mile despite every remedy Drizzt and Aragorn can offer, until it is Elrond himself, working through the night with arts older than the mountains, who finally draws the splinter of Morgul steel from the halfling's shoulder and pulls him back from a darkness that had very nearly claimed him entirely. In the days of recovery that follow, Rivendell fills, quietly, deliberately, with representatives of every free people still willing to stand against the shadow gathering in the east. Drizzt watches them arrive with the particular fascination of a man cataloging a world still mostly unknown to him. Grim dwarves down from the lonely mountain, an elf prince from the woodland realm of Mirkwood, a weathered old wizard named Gandalf whose eyes, when they finally fall on Drizzt, hold none of the wariness Drizzt has grown accustomed to, only a bright, curious appraisal that reminds him uncomfortably of certain sages he knew on the surface, the rare kind who judge a soul by its actions rather than its ancestry. So, Gandalf says, when they are finally introduced properly in the gardens below the Hall of Fire, you are the dark elf who held the Nazgûl at Weathertop and did not break beneath their dread. He studies Drizzt over the bowl of his pipe, smoke curling lazily into the evening air. I have walked this world a very long time, Drizzt Do'Urden, and met precious few mortal souls who could make that claim. I begin to think Elrond was rather more clever in sending for you than even he yet realizes. I make no claim to greatness, wizard, Drizzt says, only stubbornness, and a very long practice at refusing despair a foothold. It has served me well in worse places than this. Stubbornness, Gandalf says, with the ghost of a smile, is very often exactly what greatness looks like from the inside. Come, there is a council gathering, and I think, given all you've already risked for a halfling, you'd known less than a week. You have earned a seat at it. The Council of Elrond convenes the following morning in a stone circle open to the sky, and Drizzt sits among representatives of elves, dwarves, and men. Legolas of Mirkwood, sharp-eyed and openly curious about the strange elfkin from beyond the world's edge. Gimli, son of Glóin, gruff and suspicious in the particular way of dwarves meeting anything unfamiliar, though Drizzt notes with private amusement that the suspicion carries less venom than he might have expected, perhaps softened by his own long years of friendship with Bruenor Battlehammer. Boromir of Gondor, proud and troubled, eyes returning again and again to the small golden ring that sits, terrible and unassuming, on a low pedestal at the circle's center. The debate that follows is long, and Drizzt listens more than he speaks, learning the full shape of the choice being made. The ring cannot be wielded, not by anyone, not even in the noblest hands, for its corruption runs too deep and too patient to be resisted by mortal will alone. It must be destroyed, and it can be destroyed only one way: carried into the heart of Sauron's own realm and cast back into the fire that forged it, a journey so dangerous that even naming it aloud seems, to more than one voice in the circle, an act of near-suicidal folly. When Frodo, small, pale, still recovering but resolute in a way that steals the breath from half the circle, rises to claim the burden himself, Drizzt feels something settle in his chest that he recognizes from his own life. The particular, terrible dignity of someone choosing a hard road not because they were destined for it, but because no one else would, and someone had to. He thinks of every fight he has ever chosen for exactly that reason. He does not hesitate. I will go with him, Drizzt says, rising, and the circle's attention turns to him as one. I know nothing of your history, little of your politics, and less still of the roads you would ask him to walk. But I know a great deal about walking roads no one else will walk, and about standing beside people the world has decided to underestimate. If this halfling means to carry the fate of your age into the dark alone, he will not do it entirely alone. Not while I have blades left to draw. Aragorn rises beside him a moment later. Nor while I have breath in my body, he says. I swore this once, and I swear it again before this council. I will see this through, to the last of my strength. One by one, the others follow. Legolas for the elves, Gimli for the dwarves, Boromir for Gondor, Frodo's own kin Sam, Merry, and Pippin refusing utterly to be parted from him, until 9 stand where 1 stood moments before, a fellowship formed not by command but by choice, freely given, the same way every real alliance Drizzt has ever trusted has always been formed. Elrond watches the circle complete itself with an expression of grave, weary satisfaction. 9 companions, he says, against the 9 riders who serve the enemy. There is a symmetry in that I think we may need before this road is done. His eyes find Drizzt's, and something almost like gratitude passes between them. I did not know, when I first laid eyes on you, Dark Elf, what part you would play in this age's story. I am glad now to have been wrong to doubt it. Do not thank me yet, Drizzt says quietly. Thank me when the road is walked, and not before. I have learned that lesson too many times to forget it now. The fellowship departs Rivendell 3 days later, in the gray hush of early morning, and Drizzt walks among them with a strange, settled feeling. He is not carried in longer than he cares to measure, not quite belonging, not yet, but something adjacent to it. Purpose, chosen freely, companions, earned rather than assumed, a fight worth the risk of everything, entered into with eyes fully open. He does not know what waits on the road ahead, the mines of Moria, the shadow of Isengard, the long fracturing and reforming of the fellowship that history has already written, and that he, stepping newly into this world's story, has yet to learn. He knows only that Catti-brie remains somewhere beyond his reach, that the ache of her absence has not faded and will not fade, and that he carries her memory forward, the same way he carries every loss he's ever survived, folded close, honored, never forgotten, never allowed to become the whole of him. He knows too that Gandalf was right. Stubbornness, offered honestly and without expectation of reward, is very often exactly what the world needs most, and very rarely what it thinks to ask for. As the company crosses the last bridge out of the hidden valley, Legolas falls into step beside him, curious despite himself. You could have refused the council's burden, the elf says. You owe this world nothing. You did not choose to fall into it. No, Drizzt agrees, watching the mountains rise ahead of them, dark and waiting. But I have learned that the world rarely asks who chose to fall into it before it asks for help. It only asks who is willing to give it. He glances sideways, offering the ghost of a smile he has not felt easy enough to offer since the storm first tore him from everything he knew. I have spent my whole life proving what I am, rather than what the world expects me to be. I see no reason to stop simply because the world in question has changed. Legolas studies him a long moment, then nods. A small gesture, but one that carries, Drizzt understands, the particular weight of an elf's respect, hard-earned and rarely spoken. Then walk with us, Drizzt Do'Urden, he says. Whatever waits ahead, I think Middle-earth is fortunate that the road brought you to it. Behind them, Rivendell fades into mist and morning light. Ahead, the mountains wait, and beyond them, a war that will test every soul in this small, strange company beyond anything any of them have yet imagined. Drizzt Do'Urden walks forward to meet it, unbroken, undiminished, and, for the first time since the road that would not end delivered him into this world, no longer entirely a stranger in it. The Fellowship's road stretches on, unwritten, into mountains that hold their own dangers, and a war that has only just begun to show its true shape. But something has already changed in the story Middle-earth tells itself about courage, a new name now spoken alongside the old ones, carried by rangers who watched a stranger prove kinder than his legend, by an elf lord who chose to trust a story over a warning, by a halfling who will not forget the dark elf who knelt over his wound and refused to let fear decide what kind of night it would be. Drizzt Do'Urden did not ask to fall into this world. He did not ask to lose the woman he loved to a road that offered no explanations and no promise of return. But asking, he has learned across 2 worlds now, was never really the point. The point was choosing, again and again, in Menzoberranzan's cruel dark, and in Middle-earth's gathering shadow alike, to be the kind of soul the world did not expect, and to let that choice speak louder than any tale told about what a drow, or an exile, or a stranger was supposed to become. Somewhere behind him, a goddess of the hunt watches with quiet approval. Somewhere ahead, a war waits that will demand everything he has to give. He walks toward it anyway. He always does.